All right. We were hoping we were going to come out to a dance sequence, but just at that last moment, we changed our mind. My name is Stephanie Ruhle. I am the managing editor of Bloomberg Television. Thank you to Joe Ripp for having me here today. Thank you to this esteemed panel. This is going to be a good conversation. Every year at AMMC, you bring together the largest media magazine companies to specifically speak about how to be nimble, how to transform. Well, this group specifically, being independent organizations, almost, because you at National Geographic have a special announcement, but independent for the most part, have challenges, but you also have huge upside. So without wasting our time with long introductions, let's rip right down the line. Paul, I want to start with you. From the economist perspective, being an independent party, how has the road been easier? What are the positives?
I think it's worth just qualifying independent a little bit, because there's nothing different in an independent business model. We need more revenue than cost, just like everyone else in the room. I think there's a huge opportunity in being a single brand company, which is, I think, is the other way of thinking about this, that we're all focused on one brand. For us, that means that we can be, I think, a little bit more nimble. Everyone is closer to the core brand. Everyone in the organization gets the core brand. So I think in terms of being able to build insights into audiences and being able to develop products around that audience, I think we have a certain advantage in being closer to the brand and the audiences. But in terms of being independent as some special business model, there isn't one. And I think we have a lot of challenges, just like everybody else in the room. Larry,
being independent has been the name of the game. When you look across industries, whether it's banking, media, linear media, television, it's those young disruptors who can knock on the behemoths and simply say, your old model doesn't work. For you to sit in the middle, what's been the advantage for New York Magazine?
Well, we've been able to seize opportunities that we might not have been able to do if we were much bigger. We started out as New York Magazine, a small magazine with a circulation of 400,000, and in lots of ways, we're a nice definition of the term magazine media. We now have a website that includes an entertainment site called Vulture, a fashion site called The Cut, a science site called The Science of Us. So we were able to take what was once a small magazine and make it into a big national print and digital company. I also have to say that, at a certain point, I was the publisher of a women's magazine at one of the big publishing companies, and I couldn't make a single decision without figuring out what the impact would be on the 5 other women's magazines in that company.
If you're a woman, you probably could.
Right. Maybe. But I couldn't even come up with a rate without having to figure out what did it mean for everybody else in the company. And that's not something that you have to deal with as an independent. And I think that that's really important to be able to focus on the business unit and not the corporation.
Michaela, for you at Dwell, it's been a positive that you're in your own house, so to speak, and not part of a building?
Yeah, it's been incredibly important because we focused on the community we served from pretty much the beginning and never put the magazine in the middle, even though we knew that the magazine would always be the foundation of the brand. Focusing on the community allowed us, and our mission is bringing modern design to everyone, anywhere, anytime, any place, and in any form. And that gave way to the ability to listen to the community and to develop 11 now platforms, one of which we just sold and are partnering with. So I don't believe we could have moved that fast. I don't know that in a large company 14 years ago, the thought of we're going to have a conference and a show and we're going to have a research division and we're licensing product, and I think there would have been, wait a minute. You have a magazine and you have to take care of it and make sure you're feeding it properly, and what do you know about these other platforms? And the truth of the matter is we now know that if you listen to the community and you surround yourselves with the people who know all those platforms, you actually will do very well, and I think that's why we are where we are today.
Mike Perlis, what's been the advantage at the House of Forbes?
Well, for Forbes, I think you get to the end of the line here, many of the things are the same. We do think of ourselves as nimble. We have the ability, because we're more autonomous, to focus on our one brand. We've had the ability to invent ourselves as innovators and as disruptors, where if we were part of a bigger organization, that would be difficult. I don't think anyone has said that, thank goodness we're not part of a public company, because the focus on monthly and quarterly reporting is really onerous. So for Forbes, it's been great. We're fiercely independent based on our mission and our purpose to support entrepreneurs and free market capitalism. And as an almost 100-year-old company, for us to assume a startup company's mentality because of our ability and agility to do that, I think a lot of that is based on our being independent.
Declan Moore, we give you an asterisk because Nat Geo has just announced expanding the partnership you have had with 20th Century Fox for the last 18 years.
21st. They're only 21st.
What did I say?
28th?
I knew 21st. 21st Century Fox, expanding that relationship to really take the media footprint in a much bigger place.
Absolutely. Going back to what Paul was saying, the focus on when you have that one brand, you focus on all these different ways that you can have that brand resonate with consumers across as many platforms as possible. And the Society was very innovative getting into color television back in the 1960s and extending the brand into the international marketplace in the 90s. And today, we're pioneering along the kind of new media frontier with the push and thrust into Snapchat and Facebook and other social platforms. But the opportunity that we have now by expanding this partnership that we've had since the mid-90s when we launched the television channel is that we can really integrate our storytelling right across the National Geographic brand and deliver that to consumers at more scale, taking advantage of infrastructure that's there that we would not have had ourselves.
So these are all the positives, but let's go through the negatives. The Economist has an extraordinarily strong brand, but is having a great brand and great content enough in terms of deal-making leverage?
Sometimes is the short answer. I think one of the challenges of being a single brand, smaller company is how do you get scale? So if you are Snapchat, you're not coming to us first necessarily to be on the discover buttons. So there is an issue around how you get into partnerships and how you move the needle on some of these new platforms. Having said that, the previous speaker was talking about Line, and we've just gone on to Line. I think we're one of the first media brands on Line. We've developed 26 million followers on social media, so we're in the top 5. So there are things you can do, but I think when it comes to partnering, it can be challenging. The other thing I would say is because we're not part of a group, we can actually partner with anybody. So, if you have magazines that are lumped together under a holding company, they feel a compulsion to work together. We can actually work with anyone. So there is a challenge around scale. Having said that, we can sort of go wherever we like. I think the other thing that is an issue for sort of independent single media brands is the narrative around growth. The whole industry is talking about how much growth you're putting on, and I think with a magazine like The Economist, there's only a finite number of people who are going to read it. If we're even I can admit there's only a finite number of people who are going to read it. And I think that's another challenge, is that big media groups can talk about growth because effectively they've got a lot of similar audiences and similar content, whereas when you get to be a little bit more niche, there's a finite amount of people out there, and then the growth story becomes a bit more challenging.
But what about, and I pose this to the broader group, what about the challenge of being a big independent, or I guess I would say an establishment independent? You have got the journalistic standards, the expectations of a big magazine company, while every day with the barriers of entry being lower than ever, you've got bloggers and upstarts arriving at the table who have such low overhead costs, who don't necessarily have journalistic standards, they don't have any of the costs that you do, but they could really rock your business.
Yes. It's becoming the depressing independent panel, isn't it? Yes, but I would argue there are lots, and I think the world is changing quite rapidly right now. There are lots of upstarts in garages that have built businesses solely on advertising revenues online, built with free money, and that is all coming to an end. So yeah, I'm very aware of the challenges of independent, new businesses coming along, and in our space, there's things like Quartz and Mike, and there's lots of.
Don't worry, we've never heard of them.
No,
Just you. Just you.
lots of people out there doing something that's theoretically similar. I would argue that it's not the same, but their business models are much more challenging. We've got 170 years of history. We have a very, very strong business around selling content. So we have a hybrid model in today's language, and that actually for us, I think, will be the thing that carries us through, because I think if we're sitting here, if I'm invited back next year, some of those people won't be around.
They're not the same. They're not nearly as good. But Michaela, what's the risk when those independent upstarts are good enough? When I think about Instagram, for example, you've got interior designers and furniture designers from anywhere at any age suddenly becoming influencers with just a few images.
So the technology companies who have democratized what it means to be the publisher, right? I mean, everyone now is in the game. And we talk about journalistic integrity, which is one of the most important pieces of what's a magazine media company. I would say that we don't feel threatened at all by the Instagrams or the Snapchats or the Pinterest or the Hows or anybody else, because we have got an established brand. We know who we are. It isn't growth limiting either, because we very much see it, there was a word in technology years ago, co-opetition. And we believe that that as those platforms continue to develop and evolve, and they will, it is certainly our challenge to make sure that we do too, and that we're listening to the community, and that we don't ever allow ourselves to be bound by convention that was what people thought of the magazine business, still keeping the journalistic integrity intact. So I don't feel threatened. I actually feel empowered by those kinds of partnerships.
Declan, how about you? When
Well,
think
I would
about
agree. I mean, it's an opportunity to extend the brand and engage with new audiences on these platforms where they themselves are engaging in. So, our own experience on Instagram, when you look at what the brand essence is, on Instagram, we're able to deliver a magazine kind of moment by moment, rather than in the past what had been month by month. You've got the world's best photojournalists covering areas in exploration, culture, science, exploration, and doing it at such a high level that the brand is now the number one brand on the platform, and continuing to rise in users. And we know that's the brand reaching a whole new generation of millennials, and we will have paths to continue to engage them going forward.
But are you worried that that high level and that excellence that you achieve, that your audience wants you to achieve, what if it's no longer demanded? What if surfers and hikers and skiers who strap on GoPros, who take images all over the place, and the images aren't nearly as good,
Right.
but what if they're good enough for the audience, good enough for the advertisers?
I think it's hard. It's hard to be good enough when you're at that level of standard. We're awash in photos. I mean, billions and billions of photos increasingly are being added all the time, but there are very, very few that convey emotion and tell a story. And the power of tastemakers and brands as tastemakers is an important one going forward. And I think that's part of what we're experiencing.
I'd like to add to that and go back to your original question around do all the folks, it characterized it as all these different folks out there are our competitors. And I think it's great. I think it raises our game. Every one of the folks up here works with a brand that is iconic and extraordinary. And I think it's a real trap. And one of the advantages of being independent is you don't have to fall into that trap of looking too carefully at what everybody else is doing. At least at Forbes, I suspect in each of these other operations as well, we've got the ability to chart our own course, to decide where we want to go. We use what other people are doing as guideposts and as ways to assess how successful we are. But if we got up every morning and looked at what everybody else was doing instead of staying on our path and sticking to in our case, the relentless focus on innovation and building our own approach to how we deal with both our overarching strategy and the disruptions that come constantly in this marketplace. If we pulled everything through the filter of what everybody else is doing, it would be far less enjoyable.
Do you think Larry, this could be the year where it's content, 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 so much of it. It's as though we're waiting to drown out some of the noise, some of who we heard earlier, upstarts who could go wane-ier. Is this a year where the consumer can say, no, this is my standard, I want excellence? Because in the last few years, with the onslaught of new content, we haven't seen sort of enough vetting.
Well, I think the consumer is going to tell us what they want, and we have to be ready. That's what it's all about right now.
Were
I
we
think
fooling?
So I think there's this, everyone's talking about technology and disruption. I think it's actually consumer rebellion at one level. You know, they're rebelling against advertising with ad blockers. They're rebelling against choice. The previous presentation says you've got all these apps and you only open 5. You know, there is this thing, I think, that someone was calling peak content the other day, which I thought was quite funny. So there is this sense that actually there is all this stuff out there, and I think it comes back, you know, to consumers relying on brands that they can trust to provide what they need. That brand doesn't have to be a magazine brand, it can be a person with a GoPro, but at the end of the day, there is going to be, I think, a reduction in the amount of stuff that people are surfing, the number of apps that they're really using, because it is just overwhelming. You know, I think this 31 hours of content consumption in a day is physically impossible. So is that the right number would be the first question. But, you know, I think it's a question around people will start to rebel against all. Look at cable cutting. You know, people are cutting the cable cord, not financially, but because there's all this stuff I don't want and I'm not going to pay for.
But part of that is they're cutting because they don't care for the establishment. Maybe we were fooling ourselves into thinking we decided who the influencers were and we decided who the tastemakers were.
As I said, we have to go where they are, and there's a whole new generation of consumers who don't see things the way that we've been seeing things. I remember when native first became a big conversation, and what would we do, where was the line, how would we cross it, how would we manage it, and I think that's not that meaningful to a lot of the people who are consuming that content, because they're coming from a place where there are no precedents and all of this new opportunity, and things are being done differently.
Declan, how are you going to keep your independence and your standards while you're really tied to a global media tent now?
Well, I mean, we have been in partnership for the last 18 years, and there's never been any dilution of the editorial standards. And going forward, you know, our editor-in-chief, Susan Goldberg, who I think is here today, continues to be the editor-in-chief at National Geographic and is editorial director for all the content across National Geographic partners. So, you know, we're as committed and actually doubling down, not diluting what National Geographic is as a brand going forward, with an enhanced capability to invest in ever bigger storytelling for global audiences.
Michaela, talk about your space and adapting to digital, because I would say you're more than anyone here. We have seen such a massive digital move, and then there are platforms that are not only curating and editing, but then they're selling product. And once you're selling product, now we've got a journalism question.
Yeah. So we have been watching this carefully and participating. So partnering and licensing and figuring out ways to truly bring those 3 C's, content, community, and commerce, together under the credibility of the arbiter of modern architecture and design that is Dwell. And we made a very big bet in 2015 that I'm incredibly excited about, and we have now a third of our team, our technology, is a technology and product team. My CTO is here. He and a team built the Beats platform. Speaking about Evan, when he was talking about, you know, choice, Bobby and his team could have chosen to have gone anywhere, and they chose Dwell because they already were following the space and wondering why somebody hadn't taken a brand like Dwell and done this with the credibility. So we are building the platform, and we are incredibly excited about it because while we don't plan to compete with those who are boiling the ocean, we do believe that we will carve out a significant space there that not only leverages the Dwell brand, but democratizes the tools so that the community, all of whom have been knocking at the door on many magazine media brands, can be a part of the conversation, thus making us more of a curatorial role and still keeping us high on the brand standards.
Mike, as you're adapting to the digital age and developing new technology, how can you use this technology to bring in a wider audience, a different audience?
Well,
Because it's not all defensive play here.
No, actually, it's all, to a large degree, I think it's all offense. We, at Forbes, some of you know, built at the heart of the new Forbes is a contributor platform that allows 1,800 contributors who we choose very carefully based on their expertise and their passion, all of whom have the opportunity to earn for the contributions that they make to Forbes. They can all post their content on the platform that we began building 6 years ago and have been enhancing ever since. Our 75 full-time veteran journalists post their content to that same platform, but we now have 1,800 additional voices, again, carefully chosen and curated for their special skills and special passions. And this gives us the ability, instead of having 75 passionate voices building communities and growing our audience, instead we have 1,875 of those voices who are building their own communities. And as a result, we've taken our audience digitally from 10 million unique visitors a month to 45 million, all while keeping print at the same 900,000 rate base we've been at. And we couldn't do the digital growth that we've been doing if we didn't continue to honor and to apply some of our best people and our best journalistic skills to the front door to the brand, which is Forbes magazine and the cover of Forbes magazine.
Larry, I'd like you to comment on this. Forbes, listen, there's an infinite number of people that would like to become rich and powerful, so he's got a lot of growth opportunities. In terms of New York, you have the powerful New York brand, but we are an island. How much bigger can you get?
So it's really interesting.
Because more people are moving to Brooklyn?
Yeah, because more people are moving to Brooklyn.
Jersey City.
There you go.
Right,
You know what? That wouldn't help him. Queens, New York helps him.
People moving all over the 5 boroughs in New Jersey. But what was always incredible about New York is that it was a small magazine. It was 400,000 copies with a business model that focused the circulation in a tri-state area. And yet we knew there was a lot of demand for what we were doing. We would hear these stories about studio heads in California having the magazine read to them over the phone because they couldn't get a copy for a week. So as soon as we were able to develop our digital platform, we went at it very, very hard because we felt that we could just take this content that was kind of unavailable in a physical way in the magazine and just push it out all over the country and all over the world. And that's how we did it. So it's not the people who live on the island or Brooklyn or Jersey City. It's people who are interested in the sophisticated urban experience and how we cater to their passions all over the world. And so from the minute we were able to develop a digital platform, we knew it would be our friend. We knew it would be able to expand our audience and give the company an entirely different profile.
How did you find them? Because while they may love your content, New York might not be at the top of their mind.
Well, it's a long technical answer, but we were very strong with search engine optimization in the very, very beginning, in the early days of our site. So if you checked out anything in New York, if you wanted to shop at a department store or look up a restaurant, you were immediately taken to newyorkmag.com, and that's how it started to grow.
We've heard so many great things about optimization and growth and digitization, technology, investment. All of these things cost an enormous amount of money. How are you going to monetize digital?
Slowly would be the short answer. I think for us, monetizing digital is as much about creating a pool of people to sell subscriptions to as it is advertising. So the model we have, rather like Larry was saying, our goal is to use economist content to put it in front of people to get some level of engagement that allows us to basically follow those people around and make them an offer for a subscription. So for us, digital growth is probably as much, if not more, about getting people to pay for the content as it is to monetize it through advertising. So the 26 million people who are following us on social media, not necessarily easy from an advertising standpoint to monetize that audience, but actually in terms of building engagement with the content that leads people to subscribe, it's actually a very powerful tool. And for us, we've taken a view that there should be different products that different entry points to The Economist. So there's a daily app called Espresso that is a much sort of lower entry point to reading The Economist. The one bit of data that we've got is that no one ever has asked for The Economist to be longer. So the idea of creating more content for this audience is bonkers. For us, it's about finding ways to get the audience to have access, to make it more accessible. Video is an answer for that. Social's an answer. Audio, but there isn't, twice the double issue of The Economist every week.
Declan, artists, journalists, they don't like the dirty word monetization. But for you, how do you monetize this digital transformation?
Well, I mean, there is certainly an advertising revenue stream, but there's also a large part of the digital footprint, which for us now is more than $250 million across the social platform on a monthly basis. That is the marketing, and the content that you put out there is the marketing for your brand. And when you establish a brand in the minds of consumers that they see as relevant, and you stay true to that, you have the opportunity to build ancillary product areas off the media, which for us have been in the area of travel and in book publishing, and we've got an events business, and we have a number of other additional, so it's basically this portfolio of monetization opportunities. And on social itself, I mean, there is a direct and an indirect monetization, directly in terms of the rev share that we get, indirectly in terms of the traffic that it drives to our O&O, our owned and operated site, which we monetize at higher CPMs. And then there's that kind of tangible and intangible benefit, because when people come and they choose to register, then they become opportunities for us to engage with over a period of time in increasingly deeper ways, and ultimately with their wallets. And then there's that indirect value which comes from really being a brand that is relevant for people's daily lives. And that's the one that's equity on the balance sheet without a dollar sign in front of it, but you know that it is helping you in these other ways.
Mike, let's talk about monetization for you. I think about the live events business, or I think about how digital or having contributors has taken the magazine industry to being interactive. Mm-hmm. And is it that opportunity for interaction which is the key to monetization?
I think so. For us, you started by asking how do you monetize digital. For us, we're now fully 70% plus of our advertising revenue comes from digital. So we passed that point where we were dominated by print advertising 2 years ago, and quickly the advertising revenue from digital has become our largest source of monetization, to your point. And we are looking for ways in the interaction with the communities that we're building to find ways beyond advertising to monetize. We think of ourselves as a global media, branding, and technology company. In addition to what we're doing in media, with the magazine here and around the world, and with digital, we're looking at branded products, everything from newsletters to research to financial services, travel, real estate on a global basis, and building businesses that carry the Forbes name but are driving branded product revenue. And in addition, we think of ourselves as a technology company. The platform that I described a few minutes ago, our contributor platform, is now packaged as a product called Falcon that we actually market to other media companies, and in some cases other groups of with many voices who'd like to use that platform to get the content created by many voices out into the world. So digital monetization's happening. We want to make sure we're not too reliant on digital media. We want to go to branded products and technology as well.
But do the numbers add up? So if I get this right, if 70% of your advertising has gone digital, Is it more advertising dollars in total going to Forbes, or are you taking dollars from print? And could print end up needing to get subsidized?
Actually, in our mix, Forbes magazine is holding its own from an audience standpoint. In fact, we have from a readership standpoint, our largest audience ever. 5 of 8 of the largest audience issues the magazine has ever had happened this year. Honestly, from a revenue standpoint, print, as part of our magazine media formula, is holding its own while digital grows dramatically. I'm not sure exactly where that advertising is coming from, but our overall revenues are growing rapidly, and our digital advertising revenues are growing at 25-30% a year.
Michaela, the advertising dollar pie is growing?
Yes, it is, and it's, I think, because native and video are not only more engaging, but they are far better to monetize. The new platform that we're creating will have no banners. We cannot wait to get out of the banner business. It is, as everybody knows, it's down to, we're happy with a, 0.01 click-through rate as an industry, and it's disruptive. So other than in some mass industries, certainly not in design or home or lifestyle, will it be around anymore. We think it will all be native. It'll certainly still be native programmatic as things go, but it is all going to be on great content and images and the proper curation of the industry. And we think this will enable us, anyway, to make at least 2x this year, what we did last year.
I turn to you, gentlemen. Innovation, disruption, technological advancement, all work in a bull market. If you're an independent, you don't have a safety net. If we are facing a recession, if the volatility we've seen in the markets is only going to get worse and consumers aren't spending, we're looking at retailers get killed, what's your safety net? How do you protect yourself? You don't have a mothership saying, I will help you weather this storm.
Well, in lots of ways, we're able to make fast, important decisions that relate to how the market is changing. I would say that we're in a better position than some of the bigger companies because we can respond quickly. We don't have to wait for all kinds of corporate discussions and approvals. And so I'm not that afraid of the market downturns in relation to our size and independence. And also, as my colleagues have just said, we're at 60% digital advertising revenue right now, which is a pretty good place to be. So we have print offering, digital offering. You've heard about native and video and events. I think the live events piece is a really interesting piece as the world becomes more digital, to be able to create these live events in the spirit of these titles.
Do we not run the risk that the live event space is going to get crowded quickly?
It's
in
really
many
crowded,
areas,
but if you have
those speakers are sort of just on this global rotation that you start to wonder what they're actually doing in their day jobs. They're speaking at a lot of conferences.
Well, if you have a good event, people are going to come. Michaela and I actually put an event together between Dwell and New York. It was called City Modern. We sold out tickets to house tours and lectures and seminars, and it was really, really spectacular because it wasn't the same group of people going from place to place. We have the Vulture Festival, which is filled with big name entertainers, and people will show up if you give them something.
How are you going to weather the storm?
So we have a couple of things. One is our subscription business, our circulation business is incredibly profitable and viable, tends not to dip in a recession. So if you look at subscription revenues for magazine media, newsstand is obviously a different issue, but subscription revenues over time are broadly flat. So actually one thing I would urge is look at the value you can create out of your readers as a safety net. The other two, I personally have a belief that events are interesting but hard to scale. It's hard to get double-digit growth out of events year after year after year, so I think that's a slightly more challenging part. The third one is content marketing revenue, so we're seeing the growth in helping brands create content, and that obviously isn't recession-proof. The fourth one for us is global. So if I look at the world today for us, We have effectively 4 markets: US, UK, Europe, and Asia. At the moment, surprisingly, the US, it might not feel like it, but the US is actually doing quite well. Our Asian business is slowing. So when you have a slightly diversified portfolio of businesses and markets, we feel that we can weather it as well as anyone else.
How about the leverage you have in terms of your talent? Just even a few years ago, you knew who your competition, you knew who you hired, you knew who you trained, nurtured, developed, and you knew what the opportunities were out there and who your competition was. Now, you've got competition, you've got top talent quitting and going to companies you've never even heard of. How are you keeping them in-house?
Creating an atmosphere of innovation and making it clear that that our companies are places where people can come and be innovative, and that their roles can change over time, that they're not going to just sort of climb up a very specific ladder in a big company. And I think that's what's important. But it's interesting because I used to sit at my desk like incredibly nervous that I was going to lose people to Hearst and Condé Nast and Time Inc., and that just doesn't happen anymore. I'm losing people to Google, to Amazon, to Facebook and Snapchat.
And can you actually say you can be as innovative and exciting as those companies? Because I feel like their brands are innovation, excitement.
If they are, and it's really hard to argue with someone who's looking for that path.
There's ping pong tables and massage rooms.
And free food in the cafeteria.
I like those things.
Right.
Free food.
Right. They're still working for the man, though. And
Maybe if they work for the woman, they'd like
they're
it
still
more.
working for the man or the woman. But I think that if they want to work for a media company, they'll stay with New York. They want to work for a tech company, they'll go to Facebook.
Well, wait a minute. Seriously, we have half of our staff in San Francisco and half in New York, and certainly the staff in San Francisco, recruiting people in the heart of the Silicon Valley, everybody thinks of as, oh my God, there must be nothing harder. But the truth of the matter is, the time to be able to make a huge mark at a Google and Snapchat and Pinterest and Twitter was a few years ago. The time to join a brand who has a reputation and who is admired and has proven that it's dedicated to innovation is a really attractive proposition. And I guess I'd have to say also that hiring a CTO like I did, he just became the most important recruiting tool I have, and I'm sure his salary just went up a few zeros this afternoon. Anyway, but it's true. You get to be a part of a brand, and I'm sure it's not true for not only Dwell, that people admire and want to be a part of, and then want to be a part of the next chapter of innovation.
Right.
Mike, Declan?
We have 400 employees worldwide, published in 37 countries. And we added 50 people in the last 2 years. We're looking to hire another 100 people in the next year.
What kind of jobs?
There are jobs across the spectrum of what we do. They're content and product jobs. They're programming jobs. They're jobs. We're growing very rapidly in mobile. So mobile developers and mobile producers are an important part of this. And keeping pace with what we're doing in native advertising, in direct sold advertising, in programmatic. They run across the spectrum. One of the really interesting things that's happened for us, we like to think that our brand is synonymous with innovation and being cool and new, and we're attracting a lot of young people that way. We've also had a boomerang effect, boomerang hires. We've had 20 plus people who used to work for Forbes years ago in the last 3 or 4 years who've rejoined Forbes, who've come back to Forbes. We affectionately call them boomerangs. And I think it's a powerful testimony. Some of them left because we weren't the things I think we've become today. Now they see that we're an innovator, and we're a disruptor, and we're doing interesting, fascinating things, and we have the agility to do them in quick and effective ways. And coming back is a great experience, I hope, for them, and it certainly is for us.
Yeah, and I would say, look, National Geographic, we're a brand with a purpose, and we attract people who want to align behind that purpose and support, the passion of our explorers and scientists and researchers and conservationists that are out there. we would have more than a quarter of the proceeds from National Geographic Partners is going directly back into via the society supporting science, research, exploration, and conservation. And that's something which a lot of people feel good about and want to be a part of. And so we've been fortunate to be able to attract people. And just like yourself, we're looking to augment our storytelling teams and in the whole digital product area and software development, etc. And really moving from what has been a little bit of a siege mentality into much more of a growth mode going forward.
Now to probably the most important person. How does independence benefit the reader?
I think I don't know that readers necessarily sit and think about whether you're independent. It's not like something being organic or not GMO.
But they know what's great, and you know what conflicts or influences you
I mean,
have.
for us, editorial independence is having the editor being hired or fired by independent trustees who are not owners of the company. So there's a very deeply ingrained editorial independence in the business. I think if independence is making better decisions about the content that you're producing and the relationship with advertisers, then obviously the reader benefits hugely from that. I don't know that anyone goes to a newsstand and says, I'm going to buy the Independent magazine versus the one from Hearst. Or I don't know that that's a necessary.
But they know what's good.
Yeah, but you have to be good first and independent second, whether they're connected.
No, I agree with you. I don't think the consumer says, oh, that's a big company's magazine and that's an independent. But I do think that the independents are able to depart from sameness consistently. And in that sense, provide a really interesting and surprising product.
You can be gutsier.
You can be gutsier, you can take chances, and all of the magazines up here have done that, and you've seen what they've done. It's kind of like an indie movie. It's like an indie movie that's over there all by itself, and they've done something new and different, and an audience starts to build, and that's kind of what it is. We're independent, and we can stay away from the sameness that everybody knows they have to do in these big companies where they'll have meetings where this kind of cover sells these kinds of results or that kind of thing, and we are independent of that, and that, I think, gets the reader a really good product.
I think that, at least one of the underlying foundations of what makes the big companies so successful is a formula, right? Our economies of scale, and that's reasonable. But in this particular time in which we are living, the economies of scale are transparent. You heard Evan say it, you'll hear many other speakers say it in this 2 days, that whether or not your audience, your community today is made up of all millennials, or it's the youngest boomers and the oldest Gen Xers and some millennials coming into the audience, the transparency is shared psychographically by all of them because of what media has done. And the truth of the matter is, being able to be bolder and take risks and move faster is, I think, more important than ever to be successful. And it's not that a large company can't do that. It is just a whole lot harder to move battleships that have done things so very well for so long and change things up necessarily because the community just demands it. And if you don't give it to them, they'll go someplace else.
And now they can with all the options. Mike?
Exactly right.
We're fiercely dedicated to creating high quality content, but we're also equally dedicated, and our independence has given us the ability to do this, to delivering more content, greater diversity, many more voices, more interaction. And I think that our audience is, and our readers are well served by more opinion, more content, more quality around a more diverse package of daily content that goes out from Forbes. And I don't think we would have been able to do that within a mothership. And I'll just add that I think safety nets can be dangerous. They can drag you down as easily as they can lift you up.
Declan? He just has the most beautiful pictures. Thank you all so much. We are out of time, but now we're going to call in El Jefe, the boss, the person who brought us all here, Joe Rip.